Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. There's one moment in the Testaments that I completely misunderstood the first time I watched it. The stadium scene. For weeks, I thought it was simply another example of Commander Judd testing Aunt Lydia's loyalty. Judd hands Lydia a gun, tells her to shoot Vivian. Lydia pulls the trigger. The gun fires a blank. Scene over. At least that's how it looked on the surface. But the more I thought about it, the more one question kept coming back. Why keep Vivian alive? Because if Judd only wanted to know whether Lydia would obey, there were easier ways to find out. He already controlled their fate. He already knew they were desperate. He already knew they wanted to survive. So why create such a specific situation? Why force Lydia to believe she was killing a friend? And why make sure Vivian knew exactly what Lydia was willing to do? The answer, I think, changes the entire meaning of that scene. Because Commander Judd didn't save Vidala out of mercy. He didn't save her because he cared. He saved her because a living victim was far more useful than a dead one. And once you look at the stadium scene through that lens, you realize Judd wasn't testing Lydia. He was building a prison made of guilt, fear, resentment, and obedience. And Lydia and Vidala have been trapped inside it ever since. To understand why this matters, we need to go back to the beginning. Before Gilead, before the uniforms, before the ants, before the power struggles. Lydia and Vivian were teachers. They worked in the same world. They lived under the same system. They were colleagues, maybe even friends. Then, the sons of Jacob took over. Everything collapsed. The old rules disappeared. The old society vanished. And suddenly thousands of people were being rounded up and thrown into stadiums like prisoners. Season 1, Episode 6 gives us one of the most horrifying flashbacks in the entire series. Because unlike many scenes in Gilead, this happens during the transition. We watch ordinary people slowly realize that the world they knew is gone. Executions are happening on the field. Fear is everywhere. Nobody knows who will be called next. Nobody knows who will survive. The stadium isn't just a prison. It's a factory, a place where Gilead is deciding who gets to live and who gets to die. And that is where Judd begins his experiment. Think about the position Lydia is in. She hasn't become Aunt Lydia yet. She isn't powerful. She isn't respected. She isn't feared. She's terrified, hungry, exhausted, desperate. Every person around her is desperate. And that's important, because Judd understands something fundamental about human beings. The easiest time to reshape someone is when they're broken, not when they're comfortable, not when they're confident, when they're terrified, when survival is all they can think about. That's exactly what the stadium has done. It has stripped everyone down to their most basic instinct, stay alive, at any cost. And that's when Judd steps in. When Lydia is brought before him, he presents what looks like a choice. Shoot Vivian, or face the consequences. Now here's the part most people focus on. Lydia pulls the trigger, and because she pulls the trigger, many viewers immediately judge her. They see it as proof she was willing to betray someone, proof that she was selfish. But I think that's exactly what Judd wanted people to think. Because the real trap wasn't the gun. The real trap was what happened after. The blank. The moment the gun doesn't fire. The moment Lydia realizes what she was willing to do. That's where the experiment truly begins. Imagine carrying that memory for 15 years. Not the memory of killing someone. The memory of being willing to kill someone. Those are two different things. If Lydia had actually shot Vivian, the guilt would have been enormous. But eventually she could have rationalized it. She could have buried it. She could have blamed Judd. She could have blamed the circumstances. Instead, Judd leaves her with something worse. A question: what kind of person am I? Because now Lydia knows. When pushed to the edge, when survival was on the line, she chose herself. And Judd made sure she would never forget it. But Lydia isn't the only victim. Vidala is trapped too. In some ways, her prison may be even worse. Because she survives. She watches Lydia pull the trigger. She sees exactly what happened. She sees exactly what Lydia was prepared to do. Then she's forced to spend years working beside her. Think about how twisted that is. Every meeting, every conversation, every disagreement, every interaction, Vidala knows. She knows that the woman standing across from her once pointed a gun at her and pulled the trigger. That memory never disappears. It hangs over everything. And that's why I don't think Judd was interested in saving Vidala. I think he was interested in weaponizing her. A dead Vivian serves no purpose. A living Vivian becomes a reminder, a permanent reminder. Every time Lydia sees her, she's forced to remember. Every time Vidala sees Lydia, she's forced to remember. The trauma never gets a chance to heal. The wound never closes, because Judd keeps reopening it, over and over again. And that's the genius of the experiment. He doesn't need chains. He doesn't need prison cells. He doesn't need guards. He lets Lydia and Vidala become each other's prison. The more I think about it, the more this feels like the blueprint for how Gilead operates as a whole. Gilead rarely relies on trust. Instead, it creates systems where people monitor each other, fear each other, compete against each other, inform on each other. The wives fear the aunts. The aunts fear the commanders. Marthas fear everyone. Nobody is allowed to feel safe, because safety creates independence, and independence creates resistance. Judd understands that. That's why the stadium experiment is so important. It's a miniature version of Gilead itself. Now let's talk about Vidala, because I think her behavior throughout the series suddenly makes a lot more sense when you view it through this lens. Many fans see Vidala as one of the most loyal believers in Gilead, someone who embraces the system, someone who follows the rules, someone who genuinely believes in the ideology. But what if part of that loyalty isn't faith? What if it's trauma? What if the stadium never ended for her? Because imagine what surviving that moment does to someone. Imagine knowing that your survival depended entirely on Judd's decision, not Lydia's, not yours, his. That kind of experience changes people. It teaches them that power belongs to people like Judd, and everyone else is just surviving at their mercy. That's why I think Judd achieved exactly what he wanted. He created two women who would never fully trust each other, and because they couldn't fully trust each other, they could never truly unite against him. Think about that. What is the biggest threat to a regime? Not one rebellious person, not one angry citizen. Solidarity. People working together, people trusting each other, people sharing information, people forming alliances. Judd understands this. So before Lydia and Vidala even become aunts, he sabotages the possibility of a genuine alliance. He plants a bomb between them, and that bomb never stops ticking. What's fascinating is that Lydia eventually becomes far more dangerous than Judd anticipated, because despite everything, she starts evolving. She starts learning. She starts collecting secrets. She starts understanding the weaknesses inside Gilead. By the time of the Testaments, she's no longer simply a servant of the system. She's studying it, manipulating it, preparing for something. And that's where Judd's experiment begins to backfire, because Lydia doesn't remain trapped forever, at least not mentally. She starts finding ways to use the system against itself. She starts building contingency plans. She starts gathering leverage. She becomes patient, very patient. Vidala, however, remains an interesting contrast, because while Lydia is adapting, Vidala often appears more committed to preserving the status quo, almost as if she still believes the system can work, almost as if she's still trying to justify everything that happened. And honestly, that makes the stadium scene even sadder. Because both women were victims. Both women were manipulated. Both women were traumatized. Yet they spend years positioned against one another instead of recognizing the man responsible. That's why I think the true villain of the stadium flashback isn't Lydia. It isn't Vidala. It's Judd. The entire scene is designed to redirect blame. Viewers focus on Lydia pulling the trigger. Vidala focuses on Lydia pulling the trigger. Lydia focuses on Lydia pulling the trigger. But who created the situation? Judd. Who engineered the test? Judd. Who handed over the gun? Judd. Who manufactured the trauma? Judd. Who benefited from the division? Judd. Every road leads back to him. And honestly, that's what makes the scene so disturbing, because the blank wasn't an act of mercy. It was an act of cruelty. A different kind of cruelty. A smarter kind. Instead of killing one woman, Judd psychologically wounded two. Instead of creating a martyr, he created survivors burdened by guilt and resentment. Instead of ending the story, he made sure it continued. For years, maybe decades. The more I revisit episode 6, the more convinced I become that this is one of the most important scenes in the Testaments. Not because of what it tells us about Lydia, not because of what it tells us about Vidala, but because of what it reveals about the architecture of Gilead itself. Gilead doesn't survive through loyalty. It survives through damage. It takes broken people and keeps them broken. It takes trauma and turns it into obedience. It takes fear and turns it into power. And Commander Judd understands that better than anyone. So when people ask why Judd saved Vidala, I don't think the answer is kindness. I don't think the answer is compassion, and I definitely don't think the answer is forgiveness. I think Judd looked at Lydia and Vidala and realized something terrifying. A dead woman could only haunt one person. A living woman could haunt two, and by keeping Vidala alive, he guaranteed that Lydia would carry her guilt forever. He guaranteed that Vidala would carry her resentment forever. And he guaranteed that both women would remain exactly where he wanted them, under his control, which means the stadium scene was never about deciding who lived and who died. It was about deciding who would suffer. And in the end, Judd found a way to make sure everyone did, including Lydia, including Vidala. And maybe that's the darkest thing the Testaments has revealed about Gilead so far, because sometimes the most effective prison isn't made of walls. Sometimes it's made of a single memory that never lets you go.